Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar towards a renewable-based energy system delivering on the Fit for 55. I'm Aurélie Beauvais, Deputy CEO of SolarPower Europe, and it will be my pleasure to host and moderate the discussion today. Achieving climate neutrality by 2050 is Europe's boldest challenge, and it has to become a new growth strategy to deliver on a sustainable economy, new jobs and new industries. The climate law recently adopted enshrined a new target to reduce our CO2 emissions by 2030 of at least 55%. And that will entail new legislation and far more ambition in the existing legislation that has been approved so far at European level. The so-called Fit for 55 package will be obviously a key driver, reopening some of the critical initiatives that we have been working on in the past years, such as in particular the Renewable Energy Directive. Renewables indeed will have a critical role to play in delivering this new ambitious strategy. It is today the most cost-efficient energy source in history, with solar in particular claiming the title of King of Electricity, according to the latest statements of IEA Director General Fatih Birol. It is also key to system integration, as renewables can be deployed across all sectors and go hand in hand with electrification as a new driver to unlock flexibility and prosumer engagement at European level. Finally, the potential for renewables in Europe is absolutely tremendous. Our latest 2050 study forecasted that the production potential for wind and solar energy in particular in Europe could be up to 17,000 terawatt-hour by 2050 in the moderate scenarios. According to SolarPower Europe, this potential can be harnessed very fast. If we were to set up a target of 45% renewables in Europe's final energy demand by 2030, that would provide the most cost-efficient pathway to achieving climate neutrality. And it would also make sure that we comply with the requirements of the Paris Agreement. So the Fit for 55 will have to put in place the necessary milestones to unlock this potential in the very short term, accelerating system integration, electrification, and the penetration of renewables across all sectors and even beyond power with hydrogen and related derived fuels. But there will be also quite some challenges. Challenges related to removing the bottlenecks that we have to deploy renewables on the ground, challenges to accelerate electrification in those sectors where it is the most needed, to deploy a whole new framework for renewable hydrogen, and to track progress in an environment that becomes much more complex with the role of certification and additionality. To walk us through all those exciting topics, I'm very happy to introduce our speakers and panel today. We will start with a keynote presentation from Antonio Lopez Nicolas, which is Deputy Head of Unit for Renewables and Energy System Integration Policy at DG Ener. Antonio will tell us more in a short keynote introduction about the plans of the European Commission so far, how the Fit for 55 is integrating itself also in the broader picture of the European Green Deal. And then we will have a panel discussion to discuss the necessary milestones, with Antonio joining the panel, but also Elena Leon, which is Director for Planning, Management and Regulatory Positioning at Iberdrola, Jaume Lofredo, which is Energy Policy Officer at BEUC, Gert de Kock, which is Manager Electricity and Energy at TNE, and Andor Savelkos, which is Senior Director for Altenex Energy. And with such a dream team coming from a variety of sectors and different endeavors, I would be surprised if we cannot find the right solutions at the end of this webinar. So, Antonio, I think you can hear us. Your camera is maybe not yet on the way, but luckily you are here and so are your slides. So maybe now I just hand the floor to you in order to paint the broader context and introduce the conversation.
Yeah, So good morning, everybody. Thanks a lot, Aurélie, for the introduction and for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here today in such a timely webinar on the Fit for 55 package. I'll try to give you a few words of introduction to put things into context of the work we are trying to do these days with the package. Of course, you would allow me that I'm general and not very concrete on some of the things, because I mean, all these elements are currently under consideration, and there is of course no decision, formal decision on the commission from the commission on the package and its elements. But starting after this disclaimer, I mean, starting by slide number 2 on what we are trying to do with the RED II revision in the context of the Fit for 55 package. We are now implementing the current Renewables Directive, the 2018 December 2018 Renewables Directive, which transposition deadline is June 2021. So in 2 weeks time. So it's of course extremely important that we implement the current acquis, the current directive, to allow that the benefits of the current directive are brought to reality in the different member states. So that's, I think, the first word of context of what we are trying to do, because this explains the fact that the revision we are trying to put forward now of the Renewables Directive is not a recast as we did in 2018. It's more of a targeted review to adapt the current directive to a fast changing policy context. And what's this fast changing policy context? Well, we have, first and foremost, we have the European Green Deal and the climate law and the ambition and the plans to be the first climate neutral economy by 2050, and derived from that the climate target plan publicated last year, that aims at having an emissions reduction of 55% by 2030, which would lead to a renewable share of 38 to 40% in 2030 if we want to achieve these emissions reductions cost effectively. So this is, I think, the first clear trigger of the review, the level of ambition of the directive to deliver on the 55% and on climate neutrality. Second, I mean, we had published last year the energy system integration and hydrogen strategies, with a new vision for delivering climate neutrality in the energy system, and this is clearly one of the triggers of the review. Next to that, we have the renovation wave with the promotion of efficiency and renewables in buildings. There is also very important, and it's also motivating some of the things we are looking at. The offshore renewable strategy, that on the offshore renewable side, of course, is triggering a few of the elements we are considering. And finally, the elements that we had outlined in the biodiversity strategy in terms of bioenergy sustainability and minimization of all trees. These elements are also part of our considerations. So all in all, I mean, a combined set of the need to increase the ambition in the context of the climate target plan, but also the importance of bringing forward the actions under the different European Green Deal strategies. If we move to the next slide on the energy system integration vision, I mean, briefly, I think the vision we are trying to bring forward through this directive in that context is a vision where we can put energy efficiency and a circular energy system at the forefront. We can increase renewable electricity substantially. I mean, doubling figures from current deployment of renewable electricity and reaching around 65% renewables in the power system. We want to increase direct electrification The electricity sector is now around 25% of the final energy consumption. In our modeling, we expect this to be half of our final energy consumption by 2050. So this is a clear trend that we are trying to promote with the revision of this directive. And finally, we are trying to promote renewable fuels for the hard to decarbonize sectors, for industry, for aviation, and maritime. So all in all, I mean, these three pillars will help us to decarbonize energy production, which is energy production and use, which is 75% of the emissions. Now, if we move to slide 4 on what we are trying concretely to do with this review, we first look at the shares and at the overall ambition, and we see that we are now at less than 20%, 19.7% with 2019 figures. The current target is 32% for 2030. The numbers from member states in the climate and energy national plans is 33%, and the climate target plan tells us that we should go to 38 to 40% if we want to achieve climate neutrality and the 55% emission reductions cost effectively. The open public consultation had a strong support for increasing targets. 80% of replies we've got from the open public consultation supported a target of at least 38%, and 37% of respondents supported going beyond 40%. So this is a clear area where, I mean, the revision is looking at how to increase the overall target level to deliver on this increased ambition of the climate target plan. But it's not only about that number, and it's not about the targets only. The directive, the Renewables Directive, is a piece of legislation that covers many sectors and many measures. So the idea is that we continue delivering on this increased ambition through a combination of sectorial targets and enabling measures across the different sectors, complementing obviously carbon pricing and complementing all the measures of the package. So we are looking at a number of areas to increase this level of ambition and to allow that member states are able to use those measures and to implement those measures to deliver on the goals of the directive, on the targets cost effectively. Because, I mean, having numbers without the measures would lead to a situation where, I mean, targets might not be achieved, or targets might not be achieved at the right time, or targets might not be achieved cost effectively and at the lowest possible cost for European citizens and industries, which is what we are trying to achieve here, thanks to the decreasing costs of renewable energy. So we are looking at the sectors, transport and heating and cooling primarily. I mean, there the climate target plan is clear. I mean, it speaks about a level of ambition of 24% for transport, 39% for heating and cooling. Those levels are clearly above the current targets in the Renewables Directive. So there is a need to look at those and see how, I mean, we can best deliver on those elements of increased ambition, and with which measures we can reinforce these sectorial targets. Also looking at sectors that where the directive has been less involved traditionally, such as buildings and industry, which are a key part of the final energy consumption, especially for heating, and where possibly, I mean, some measures can help unlock member states' potential for renewable deployment. Second area mentioned earlier, energy system integration. That's a clear priority and a clear focus of the things we are doing. So there is a clear ambition to look at how to promote further direct electrification of end-use sectors and help electric vehicles and transport electrification, but also heating electrification via heat pumps. There is also a number of measures being analyzed to further support renewable fuels and renewable hydrogen for the hard to decarbonize sectors. Some of those things have been already outlined in the hydrogen and energy system integration strategies. So we are looking at those in the context of this revision. Then bioenergy sustainability. We want to ensure that the bioenergy sustainability criteria that were extended in 2018 to forest biomass are fully fit for purpose and in line with the increased ambition of the European Green Deal and the EU biodiversity strategy. And we are topping off, these three areas with a number of flanking measures across sectors that are like trying to see how we can remove existing or perceived existing barriers to renewables deployment across sectors. And we are looking at things to give you some flavor, things connected to permitting, things connected to PPAs, things connected to GOs, for example, things connected to offshore. So there are a whole range of issues that we are analyzing with the ambition to help unlock further renewables potential. So if we can move to the final slide, then a final word before concluding on the package itself, because we have now this revision, but we need to see it not in an isolated manner, but in a joint way with the other pieces of the Fit for 55 package. So this is part of the way the Commission is working and the European Green Deal. So we are trying to work on a package approach and see what's the best way to achieve the goals of the package using the different tools at hand. And for example, there are clear interlinkages. The ETS extension to transport and buildings is one clear area of importance and complementarity to the regulatory measures of the Renewables Directive. The Energy Efficiency Directive is also clearly important to support the achievement of ambitious goals. Then there is a clear link, for example, with the LULUCF, land use and land use change and forestry, for all that has to do with bioenergy sustainability. There are links with the DG Move proposals on aviation and maritime in terms of deploying renewable fuels such as hydrogen. There is a clear link with the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Directive in terms of further promoting alternative fuel infrastructure and electrification, but also renewable hydrogen. And of course, there is also a clear link with the future proposals that will come in December from DG Energy on the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which is extremely important for buildings, complementing what we'll do now in the Renewables Directive, and also the hydrogen and gas decarbonization package, which will look more at the market rules side of hydrogen, complementing into the hydrogen arena what we'll do with the Renewables Directive, but also what we've done with the 10E regulation proposal that we tabled in December, which is being negotiated by Council and Parliament. So that's it in a nutshell for my introduction, and sorry if I've taken a bit longer than expected, and I'm happy to take questions during the panel.
Thank you very much, Antonio, and don't worry, it's not your fault. The Fit for 55 is a very big nutshell indeed, with a lot of initiatives all across the place, a lot of transversality. That's what we call climate mainstreaming indeed, which is one of the key principles of the Green Deal, and that gives us a lot of work and a lot of things to discuss, which is why it's perfect that we have a bit more than an hour for the upcoming panel discussion. So to our audience, I'm sure we're going to touch upon a lot of elements, and you may have a lot of questions. So here on this slide, you see how you can, as an attendee, ask your question. So just use your control panel, type the question in the box and click, and I will be able to receive your questions in real time, and I will do my very best to incorporate those questions as the panel discussion goes. Now, it's time for us to reflect on all those elements that were just presented by Antonio, and have the views of all our panelists here. And maybe I will start with the most obvious or the biggest, I would say, measure that we have in the Fit for 55, the most political and most visible, which is the target. So Antonio mentioned a very broad support from the stakeholders and the civil society to increase the target. The climate target plan suggests to revise it from the current 32% to 38 or 40%. What is the opinion of the industry in particular? I mean, Elena, I would like to hear a bit your views. Iberdrola is one of the biggest renewable majors in the world and in Europe. You are actively deploying solar and renewable installations on the ground. Do you think we can achieve more? And you would need to unmute yourself or be unmuted by my team.
Thank you, already. Thanks a lot for the question. Yeah, we do think that the targets always should be ambitious. We've seen at the beginning, every time you set a target, it looks impossible. And at the end of the day, you are able to get it. And so in that regard, we would ask for a real ambitious target, but also achievable. So we have to keep the balance with both of them. And what we also think is that the acceleration will improve the target. So it's not only how you set or where you set the level, but also how you get to achieve the level. So if we accelerate the implementation of renewables and the decarbonization path, we will be able not only to achieve the target set, but also to improve it. And that's so we shouldn't be, letting all the effort to the end of the last 5 years of the decade, but we should accelerate that. And lastly, one comment about the quality of the target. So we could go for a really huge target, but if we include things that are not renewable and account for the target, then we are not achieving anything. So we should set an ambitious but achievable target, and also we should have the precise definition of how to achieve those targets, and let's not repeat the problem we had with the biofuels, for instance, with the first generation biofuels. I think that's an example we should learn from.
Thank you. I'm sure Geert will have a lot of things to tell us also about that. But Elena, just to insist slightly more, when you say ambitious target, is it 40% or more than 40%?
I think we could ask for more than 40.
All right. Thank you. I mean, part of this could be, we have seen in the past national targets being set up also very much by and driven by public tenders, by government action. What we see, I mean, a trend that we've seen a lot in the past years is also how private investments are progressively supporting and complementing national investments, which could be also a good case for increasing the target. Andor, that's your everyday life, to advise corporates and help them to secure renewable contracts. I mean, how do you see the role of CPPAs in driving a more ambitious target in the very near term?
Indeed it is. Good morning, Aurélie. So no, I think end users are very important in this respect. So it's true that the corporate PPA market in Europe has been lagging the corporate PPA market in the US historically, but it's really rapidly catching up now and maturing. So just looking at the numbers, in Europe in 2019, 2.6 gigawatts of corporate PPAs were announced, which comprised around 13% of the global market for corporate PPAs. Last year, that was already 7.2 gigawatts, comprising 29% of the global corporate PPA market. And if we look at the latest numbers up to the end of May, we're at 2.6 gigawatts of corporate PPAs announced on Europe, comprising up to 32% of the global market. So you see that the North American or the US market is becoming very similar in size to the European market. And as we know, industrials and corporates have really been leading the build out of renewables in the US. And so I think in Europe, with the gradual phase out of subsidies from governments and then probably limiting support from governments more to facilitating permitting, which I'm sure we'll get to discuss more later during this panel discussion, and also on the infrastructure side, so enabling, for example, offshore grid connections. The role that corporates will play in the further build out of renewables is going to be more and more important in my view.
Thanks a lot, Andor. So also indeed pleading for more ambition, the huge potential, because I think for corporate PPAs, the best is yet to come. We're just griping a tiny part of the potential driven by industrial demand. So very interesting indeed. I think also, Elena, you mentioned a term which is perfect for my transition to the question to Gert, which is the target must be achievable and qualitative. So it comes back also to the design of the target. And actually the transport sector, which is obviously highly emitting as well, is very lucky, shall we say, to have its own target or sub-sectorial target. What is your opinion on this, Geert, and do you think it should also be increased as we speak?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to echo some of Elena's comments. Indeed, transport is a bit of a special sector. The transport sector does have its own targets. Because this is kind of an electricity crowd, I'm assuming, and not so much a transport crowd, but you should become more of a transport crowd in the future. I just want to briefly say what the current transport target is. The current transport target is 14% of energy delivered to the transport sector, road and rail, and only 14%, but only half of that is binding. So the red since 2018 really only drives advanced fuels, only forces member states to impose fuel suppliers to supply a certain percentage of advanced fuels, be it renewable electricity, advanced biofuels, or hydrogen, green hydrogen, or e-fuel. So in a way, the red doesn't drive the demand for crop-based biofuels anymore. And so that kind of brings me to the 24% that Antonio mentioned earlier, that is in the climate target plan, where we fear that is, this is uncharacteristic for an environmental group, where we say that that target is probably set rather high. So we think that a more ambitious yet realistic target would be more around 16%, because we don't see a role for crop-based biofuels long term. So we think this should be phased out as soon as possible. So that already reduces the target substantially, because in that 24% you still count a lot of biofuels. We think the Commission is too optimistic on the advanced biofuels. I know that's not the topic today, but we think 5% biofuels are sort of the limit of what you can achieve. So we have high hopes for renewable electricity charged in electric vehicles. So that is very crucial. We think 10% is achievable there. And we think 1% hydrogen and electrofuels are achievable. So 1 + 10 + 5, that gets you to 16. So we think 16% is ambitious yet achievable and realistic. But the red, in our view, is not the driver for electrification of the transport sector. We need ambitious standards, and Antonio mentioned this as well, for CO2 standards for cars, vans, trucks. That is what will really drive the uptake of zero-emission vehicles, and that is really what we need. The red has an important role to play in incentivizing and rewarding the use of renewable electricity. And so what we're seeing in member states today is that still member states try to achieve targets, and maybe even now higher targets, with biofuels only. So they impose a biofuel blending mandate, whereby biofuels are blended with fossil fuels and burned in combustion engine vehicles. So we think we need a broader, so we can talk about the level of the target, but we also need a qualitative shift away from biofuel blending towards more compliance options for fuel suppliers, really rewarding renewable electricity and transport, and if necessary, also hydrogen, green hydrogen and transport. So this is what we really need, and particularly renewable electricity should play a key role as a transport fuel of the future.
Thank you, Geert. So incentivizing and rewarding the use of renewable electricity in transport. I mean, I hear indeed an important ambition for the role of compressed electricity for charging. and maybe indeed a counterintuitive position not to be too ambitious on this side, but I understand mostly due to the design of it, where maybe the most sustainable sources might not be incentivized in the short term. Is that right?
Yeah, so I think if you set the target very high, I think likely the cheapest compliance options will win first, and so we will drive an unsustainable demand for those, and then the harder compliance options will be left for a later date. So this is how the transport fuel target will work in practice, we think.
Thank you. Very clear. I mean, I would like to ask a question afterwards to Jaume, because I think consumers have a lot to say when it comes to more ambition. But if you allow me, Jaume, I will first go to Antonio for a quick reaction, because I mean, you will be one of the architects of the upcoming 2030 target. We have together actually worked already extensively 2 years ago to adopt a target, which was adopted after tremendous levels of negotiation, countless hours of negotiations in trialogues, where you probably ended up yourself a lot sleeping at 5 a.m. After all these council meetings. This target was achieved. 2 years after, we are already reopening it. And it refers a bit to what Elena was saying. I mean, we tend to set ourselves targets, we think they're ambitious, but then the more we go, the more we feel, we could have done better. What is the Commission's strategy to make sure that this target that we reopen is going to be future-proof, that we will not get to reopen and change again the regulatory landscape in 2 years' time, because we need investment certainty and clarity. So why then, you know, being kind of conservative? Do you think the 38–40% is conservative? And how do we make sure we don't come back to it in 2 years? Because again, costs have evolved dramatically.
Yeah, so thanks really for the question. I mean, indeed, it was like 3 years ago when we agreed on the RED II targets, and I think it was something like 4 a.m. in the morning. So I think we should probably celebrate the anniversary. No, I mean, speaking seriously, I think the directive, I think, and the revision, I mean, intends to be future-proof. So and we intend to do that, I mean, by building on what we already have in terms of measures. I mean, not to go for EU turns in policy, allowing member states to build and complement what they already have, and to continue supporting things in the way things are being done, to really enhance rather than change and lead to a deadlock. That's the first thing. Second, I mean, the targets are defined as a floor, so that's the minimum ambition that member states should achieve. So in that way, I don't think if we set the target at a given level that further ambition is not achievable. And if we see it with the current framework, where the target is 32, but member states have decided to go for 33.1, between 33.1 and 33.7. So this is, I think, a flexible mechanism that allows member states to go further. We are convinced that the EU in the long run can go further, and I think in the past we've seen that the major decreases of costs of renewable technologies make possible what we think or what we thought a few years ago was not going to be possible. And actually now it's a real opportunity for the EU to go in this direction, because renewables are not only about climate change. Renewables are about growth, jobs, industrial leadership, energy independence. So there are quite a few advantages that are at the very center of the European Green Deal. Now, we also need to be, as Elena said, I mean, we need to be also realistic, and we need to work with in a careful way to try to remove the different measures and to allow for renewables to be installed. Because if we look at the numbers, I mean, renewables were at 14.4 in 2010 overall share, and are at 19.7 in 2019. So it means like a 5 percentage point increase in 10 years time. So now what we are planning to do, imagine that we take the climate target plan numbers as a basis. So we are multiplying the pace of increase and installation of renewables by 4 compared to what we've done in the previous decade. So it's achievable, it's possible, but of course it means that member states have to have the right legislation in place, the right measures in place, and that at the end of the day, I mean, industry is provided with certainty about what needs to be done and when. And I think this is extremely, I mean, regardless of the number, this is extremely important. And here is where it comes, and the different points mentioned by Andor. I mean, the role of PPAs is extremely important because it provides an alternative financing and an alternative driver of renewables by corporates, by companies, that complements or potentially even replace what it can be got via state financing. So I think this is extremely important to have in the next decade to allow achieving ambitious renewable targets. Permitting is extremely important. Offshore is extremely important. I mean, but all different technologies. I mean, solar is extremely important. And if we look at the numbers of the climate target plan, I mean, we see how ambitious are the installation goals we have for 2030 of the different technologies. Now, maybe one final word on transport and the comments from Garrett, that indeed I think and we see it in the energy system integration strategy. I think the clear priority is to go for electrification wherever this is possible. I think we attach a lot of importance to electrification of transport and the use of renewable electricity. We see this as often the most efficient and the most cost-effective way to achieve decarbonization of the sector. So we are looking at the review with this in mind. So this is clearly a part of our thinking, alongside advanced biofuels and alongside renewable fuels of non-biological origin, for which we see a clear role to play, but a clear role to play in the harder to decarbonize sectors. So at the end of the day, it's a question of hierarchy, if you want to call it like that, on where we use those high quality, limited availability renewable fuels to decarbonize the transport sector. If you use them for passenger cars, you are not going to use them for aviation, maritime, or heavy duty. So I think that's I think the important thing we need to figure out, also in connection with the proposals on aviation and maritime. And I'll stop here.
Thank you, Antonio. I think quite extensive answer. Yes, Elena?
If I may, yes, of course, the objective for 2030 is going to be a challenge, whatever it is. I mean, 45 is more challenging than 40 for sure. But just to highlight the bright side of this challenge, I think there are 3 different things compared to the last for the past 10 years. First is the competitiveness of the renewables. We've run a very long path of competitiveness, and now, even though they are already competitive, the renewables we expect like a 30% or something like that to be improved by 2030. So that's something that helps in order to get a larger penetration of the renewables. Second thing is the growth. The growth not only substituting fossil fuels, but also the growth in electrification. So as the demand is going to be electrified, we will need more renewables. So we have a field to fulfill, and that's so there's an opportunity there. It's not only that we are substituting, it's also that we are growing. And the third one is the social awareness. It's increasing for all the climate change, and it's something that is it helps to accelerate things. So we've seen it in transport. Not only is an economic thing, you have an electric vehicle, you can Try it, and you're going to like it better than the combustion one. So that helps to create a demand and to create a desire of electrifying and of growing in renewables. Thanks.
Thank you, Elena. I mean, talking about social awareness, indeed, consumers are an essential part of the equation, and they need to be empowered to adopt the clean energy solutions that are put at their disposal, and they also need to be kept in mind when it comes to the affordability of the transition. And it's really the other side of the coin. You know that we know actually, and we've been quite vocal together with you on the fact that the cost of the transition so far has been mostly borne by electricity consumers. Beyond the paradox that it triggers this perfect effect while the price signal kind of disincentivizes the most sustainable energy use, driving towards maybe other cheaper fossil-based option, it has also placed a stronger focus on the whole issue of affordability and energy poverty. So how do you approach its debate on increasing the ambitions, and how do you think we can address the consumer bottleneck or maintain limit energy poverty?
Thanks, Aurelie. Well, first thing, well, of course, I mean, having an ambitious target is very important. But well, I'm happy that Antonio remarked that the discussion is not and should not only be about the target, and affordability clearly is important. Now, to make the example of buildings, for example, we know that in many countries heating with a heat pump is still more expensive than heating with a fossil fuel boiler. And clearly, I mean, although, and Elena is right, that consumers want to contribute to, well, to tackling climate change, but we cannot expect hundreds of millions of consumers to switch to heat pumps if this is still more expensive compared to fossil fuels. And part of the equation, of course, is that electricity today is still more expensive than fossil fuels. And well, we think that there are two things that should be done immediately, actually. And well, here again, I'm happy to hear that Antonio said that the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive should not be seen in an isolated manner. But here, I'm afraid I have to increase the complexity of the discussion and add a couple of more pieces to what Antonio said. First thing that needs to be done is the proper implementation of the Electricity Directive and of the measures in the Electricity Directive on demand-side flexibility. In many member states, these measures were not yet implemented, although we know that the energy system will need consumers' flexibility to integrate increasing amounts of renewable energy at an affordable cost. And yet consumers don't receive price signals and don't have the opportunity to contribute to the needs of the energy system, thanks to dynamic price contracts, thanks to aggregation contracts in many countries. And here I want to say it very clearly, the implementation of these measures in the Electricity Directive is imperative if Europe wants to achieve its renewable energy targets at an affordable cost. And this will be important not only for the integration of renewable energy, but also for reducing energy bills for consumers, because more flexibility on the demand side will allow for lower need of investments in electricity grids, hence lower network tariffs in consumers' electricity bills. The other bit is that consumers will be able to achieve savings in their energy bills directly if they can use energy flexibly and are rewarded to do so. Last point, you're right, Aurelie, that at the moment, electricity has borne the cost of the energy transition more than fossil fuels. Many consumers across Europe pay for renewable energy levies with their electricity bills, and we see that this is a problem, and this balance should be shifted. Member states should look at it immediately, and first thing that they should do, of course, is carrying out an impact assessment, understanding what the impact of this shift in the balance would be on the most vulnerable. Second is moving forward with addressing this imbalance while also protecting vulnerable consumers from high bills.
Thank you, Jaume. Talking about also, I mean, energy levies, Andor, do you see also it as a an increasing issue for corporates. I mean, in the whole CPPA setting. I mean, maybe you don't have a lot of elements on that, but it's more because it's been a question also in countries such as Ireland, where there was this discussion about should we, for example, reduce energy levies for corporate that invest significantly in additional renewable capacities. So you do contribute in having new renewable installations online, but then you still pay the full levies on your electricity bill. I mean, is it also a question for your clients? Maybe you or Elena?
Yeah, I think that's actually where a corporate PPA can really help, of course, because it replaces electricity that you would otherwise, as an end user, have to import from the grid and typically indeed pay these levies on. So I think corporate PPAs, although they have their complexities and there are still issues to be resolved to make them as competitive as we should across all the member states, but corporate PPAs do give that opportunity not just to get the environmental benefit from getting the guarantees of origin, but also a financial benefit, and like I just described. And I think that's why it's such a great opportunity for any company really to consider.
Thank you, Ando. Antonio, before I move to the delivering on the ground, because I think we've heard a lot of potential bottlenecks here to be tackled, but I just would like to hear if you have a reaction on the topic of consumer affordability, level playing field. I mean, this issue has been there for a long time. We have been unable to solve it so far. Is it the time where we change it and we put in place a true level playing field now that system integration really puts this issue even more on the spotlight?
Indeed, I think that's very much part of our thinking, and it's at the very center of what we are trying to achieve with the package. I mean, it's not a political slogan. I think consumers need to be at the center if we want to decarbonize cost effectively, and if we want to have, I mean, citizens at the end of the day supporting the energy transition. So there is no other option than to go in that direction. I think many of the decisions and the choices and the changes will need to be consumer driven. We are not gonna make the change if we don't empower consumers to drive the change. And I think, I mean, there are quite a few of the elements of the package that are looking in that direction. I mean, I would mention, for example, I mean, the level playing field issues, taxation related issues, I think have been touching and we're trying to solve them in the context of the energy taxation directive. So we feel that it's clearly a barrier for the electrification of heating to have the current level of taxes and levies for the different energy carriers that do not really support energy system integration and do not really help the consumer to go for a heat pump when often this could be the most efficient choice. So these sort of things are very much part of our thinking. So I mean, what Jaume mentioned on the implementation of the clean energy package is clearly a no-brainer, a no-regret solution, and something that needs to happen, and on which we are investing as Commission a lot of effort to try to get it done, because often I think people forget the importance of implementation. And if we don't implement the clean energy package, then I mean, we won't have the benefits of the clean energy package, period. That's it. So I mean, next to the revision, we have to pursue implementation.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Antonio. Just a quick follow-up question, just very quick, because the energy taxation is indeed a cornerstone of this conversation on the level playing field. We tried to adopt it in 2012 or revise it. We failed. What is the percentage odds or chances that we succeed this time?
Well, that's difficult to say, yeah. But I think what we can I think promise is that the first step, which is the Commission proposal, will be done, and we'll try to propose a taxation regime that will support the achievement of the goals of the European Green Deal. Now, it will go through difficult discussions in co-decision, and let's see what we can get out of the process. But we'll do our best and we'll invest our efforts because we are convinced that this is a key proposal in the context of the package.
Thank you, Antonio. Looking forward to this proposal indeed, and we'll do our utmost to support you in driving this through as an important element for system integration and consumer empowerment. Now I would like to move to a more practical conversation. Now that we went a bit through the targets, we discussed a bit also the affordability, the role potentially in the transport sector, and I would like to deep dive a bit further in that afterward with you, Gert. But coming back really to achieving on the ground, even though we have ambitious targets, we need to make them achievable. And so that's also making sure that we can deploy massively renewables in the next decade. So Antonio, you said even looking at the current target, that means a 4 times multiplier compared to the pace that we've had. Elena, do you think we have the framework that is needed to develop 4 times more renewables? I mean, do we have the technology and the cost competitiveness, but also do we have the hardware needed from the regulation side?
We have a slow framework, I would say. I was talking about the acceleration. It's not only what you implement or you deploy, it's also the rhythm that you need for that. So I think it's a very common ask from the industry is the processes and the permits. So we should be simplifying and streamlining all the permits. So, and even though I know there are different regions and different and local specifications, we should be trying to unify them as much as we can. For instance, in Spain, we have 17 regions, and each of them has a different process and a different permits and paths to get those. So all of them should be streamlined and simplified, and that could also improve the competitiveness. It's much easier that new agents can come into different regions if you have a standard procedure. And the European Commission could also help, not only with the simplification of the permits, but also with the benchmark, and the monitoring of the implementation of the new processes. So we can see what the best practices are, and we can implement them in the rest of the countries. We could for sure improve the rhythm of the renewables that we may need. I think the technology allows a PV plant to be built in 1 year. So why should be using 4 times that time only for the permit processes? It doesn't make any sense.
Thank you, Elena. Is it also a problem for corporates wishing to invest in renewables? Are permitting deadlines a blocker for your clients, Endo?
Yes, absolutely. The permitting issues, delays are a real issue. They limit, let's say, the number of projects available for off-takers and increase their risks, especially if we consider countries like Germany and Italy. It's a real issue. And so when we assess renewable energy bids for our clients, we look at both the quantitative factors like the price and the term of the contract, but also all these qualitative factors like the development risk, the construction risk, the counterparty risk. And what we now see is, due to these issues, that many clients are hesitant to contract for a corporate PPA before the permitting and also the grid connection is finalized. And that's really hurting both the project developer that wants to create a bankable project, obviously, but it's also hurting the end users, because they will not get then access to the most competitive prices from these early stage projects. So it's really something, I think, to look into and to try to harmonize and provide guidelines across the member states for.
Thank you. So also a chicken and egg question indeed, where then corporates are maybe reluctant to engage if they don't know how much it will take to build, and at the same time, without corporate commitment to buy this electricity, the financials of the project cannot be as good for the developer. Antonio, we know that actually the Commission is aware of that and has some ideas on how to solve that. Could you quickly tell us what you think could be envisaged to solve this permitting bottleneck, which is now very well identified?
I think indeed, I mean, this doesn't come as a surprise. I think permitting comes across as probably the key barrier for renewables deployment across the EU in every stakeholder consultation we have. So we are really aware of the problem. I think we have a big part of the solution already in place and already agreed. And I think RED 2 contains very important provisions in terms of improving permitting. We have Article 16 with the contact points at national level, and with the maximum timelines for project approval of 2 years that could be extended to 3. So if these RED 2 provisions were implemented in an ambitious and timely way by member states, as we expect, I think a big part of the permitting problem will be solved. The problem is that member states are facing issues to implement those provisions. Those provisions are considered very ambitious or difficult to implement by many. So what we are trying to do is to work together with member states to support an ambitious implementation of those. And of course, I mean, elements connected to help them with guidance, with best practices, and with any type of support we can think of to make those provisions implementable are being considered. So I think we are looking at it from that point of view in the context of the review, and see what else can be done to make it happen in practice, because this is a clear case where the legislation is in place at European level, but need to be translated at national level in an ambitious way if we want to make it happen.
Thank you. Just I saw a question from the audience that also relates to the auction design. I mean, I know that's more of a stated discussion, but Elena, could you maybe quickly tell us if that's also an issue for which could be related to permitting? I mean, basically the various auction frameworks across member states.
Well, for the auctions, you mean? Yes, of course. I think the auctions help because they give the opportunity for all the competitors and all the agents to access a market in which otherwise, if they're not present, it would be very hard for them. So that's of course a help. The thing is with the auctions, and we've seen in different cases that they need to be designed not only to obtain or to achieve the capacity that we need for, but also to afterwards for those projects to be constructed and built on. And we've seen some cases in which that doesn't happen. And we've seen a lot of times that some of the auctions are missed, awarded, and that's something because of of course the permits, but also the size of the projects. There are countries in which you cannot go for a 200 PV plant, for instance, whereas in other you can. So the design and the permits, of course, is part of the key thing in order to get a successful auction.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot, Elena. Going into the bottlenecks, also when it comes to system integration, I mean, system integration means electrification and even more renewable-based electrification. Again, you already said, I mean, that already looking at the target, maybe that there are some improvements to be made, that maybe the Renewable Energy Directive cannot be the driver on electrification, but maybe it can reward or incentivize the use of renewable electricity. I mean, how do you assess, a bit two questions in one. First, how do you assess the appropriateness of the framework that we have to electrify transport? According to our study, 2050 study, road transport could be almost fully electrified by 2030, and that's a very important leverage to achieve climate neutrality. How can we make that happen? And how do you think the Renewable Energy Directive can drive or serve the purpose that you mentioned earlier, which is to increase the use of renewable electricity in the transport sector?
Yeah, I think I come back to the previous point, and maybe I start with a little quote that I like. If the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to treat everything as if it was a nail. So that's so if you only have the combustion engine vehicle, then obviously biofuels are your go-to option because it's a blendable fuel. Of course, I think the arrival of the battery electric vehicle and its cost competitiveness and soon cost competitiveness, like sticker price wise, with petrol cars, of course, changes that whole paradigm. So I think, again, I think we need to really move beyond this biofuel blending mandates and really credit renewable electricity as a transport fuel. So fuel suppliers need to be able to do this, need to be able to go, for example, to a charge point operator and use those renewable electricity credits for the electricity charged and use that toward their own targets to meet that the national targets that's imposed on them. So I think the Netherlands is really pioneered in this field. I think Germany has had a system and has fundamentally revised its system. France is introducing also this kind of credit mechanism. So this is an idea whose time has come, and we think these sort of credit mechanisms should be available all over the EU. To really reward or to really properly reward renewable electricity, you need to have the multiplier. I know this may be a bit technical, but because of the superior efficiency of a battery electric vehicle, we absolutely need that multiplier of 4, which is included in the red, and that needs to stay there in our view, because otherwise renewable electricity is just too efficient, quote unquote, and it would not be able to play its role towards achieving the targets that are imposed on fuel suppliers. So I think you need both. You need that credit mechanism, and you need the multiplier to really drive and also incentivize, for example, a charge point operator to maybe either through a direct connection or through a PPA to also try to source more renewable electricity and really incentivize that charge point operator to really go beyond just buying guarantees of origin to claim renewability, but to also drive additional installation of renewables. So I think that's another element where we shouldn't just be happy with what's available on the grid, but really incentivize to go beyond that. And I think PPAs could play a role in that. So yeah, I think those are some of the comments I would give to your question.
Yes, thanks a lot. I mean, certification indeed and traceability will be a very important part of the debate, and we'll go back to it afterwards. Just wanted to pick up on what you said about credit mechanism and a very good example indeed that we have in the Netherlands, where we understand that also PPAs are being used more broadly by more and more charging operators to supply their infrastructures. But also I would like to stop on the discussion which you had on the multiplier, because I understand that's one of the measures which could be put into question in the review. Antonio, how do you plan to then really incentivize electrification and renewable use of electricity in transport? Because I think it's also no surprise that as it's currently set, the provisions for transport in the RED II are maybe biased towards biofuel, whereas in particular, when it comes to road transport, the pathway is quite clear. So what are the provisions which are being studied at the moment to really rebalance the shift towards electrification and incentivize the use of renewables?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, first, we tend to see, I mean, the decarbonization of transport and the promotion of electrification, I mean, as a triangle. I mean, indeed, I mean, as mentioned by Gerd and also by you, Aurélie, the CO2 for cars, I think is the prime driver for electrification of transport. It's extremely important in that regard. Then we see the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Directive as the other part of the triangle, and then the final element is the Renewables Directive. So we are looking at the three of them together to be able to provide the right incentives. We agree fully that, I mean, at the end of the day, the Renewables Directive needs to incentivize electrification of transport. So it's and the design of the obligation and the design of the target needs to have all those elements inside, so that the right signals are provided to the market, and we don't end up incentivizing something that we don't want to incentivize, or giving priority to biofuels that you would need for aviation and maritime to be used in passenger vehicles. So that's, I think, a clear part of our reflection. We are looking at many of the things that have been raised by you, by Gerd, on, I mean, these credit mechanisms from Netherlands, Germany, and France are very promising, and are being analyzed in the context of the proposal. We are looking at also other elements on how to better incentivize energy system integration and the use of renewable electricity into both transport and heating. So this is, I think, this is very well in our radar screen, and very much part of our thinking. So there will be elements on that in the proposal. It's difficult to say at this stage what we are going to propose concretely, because these are the type of discussions we are having these days inside the Commission to tailor the proposals in the right way, and to make them fully complementary. But that's for sure coming in the proposal on the 14th of July.
Thank you very much, Antonio. What about the electrification of buildings, Jaume? Most of the consumers today are also living in multi-occupancy buildings, so it's not so easy. I mean, when you own your house, at the very least, it's easier for you to electrify it and put a solar panel on it, but much more complex in the built environment. What is your assessment in the current state of play for renewable electricity use in buildings, and what needs to be done?
Yeah, thanks. Well, there are some, well, also SolarPower Europe is thinking about mandatory installation of rooftop solar, and we think it's a proposal that's worth looking into, and we are looking together with our members how these could be shaped in a way that could benefit consumers. But again, I want to shift the focus again on implementation, and I'm happy to say that, to hear that Antonio said that it's very important. And here, the implementation, the proper implementation of rules on self-consumption is key for consumer trust. We know that consumers will need to invest to produce solar power at their premises, but consumers will not make these investments if the regulatory framework on incentives, on remuneration, is not stable, because we've seen that regulatory stability in the past actually created some mistrust from consumers and hurt the business case for solar power in the past. And we see that, like, in this restructure, it could happen also with electrification of heating and demand side flexibility. Yes, there is I mean, the first problem is that incentives today are missing for consumers to use energy flexibly. But the other issue, which is strictly connected to it, is that, yes, of course, these rewards and remuneration should be introduced, but they should remain stable over time, because we don't want to risk that the same thing that happened, for example, with I don't know, with the mistrust created by tax on sun in Spain, happens as well with demand side flexibility.
Thank you, Jaume. And I also understand that when it comes to prosumer business models, permitting actually and administrative procedures in some countries, that's also something that's been pointed out by a member of the audience, that actually, in Germany, for example, becoming a prosumer seems to be quite cumbersome. So I don't know if you would expect some simplification on this side, or if it's also just the implementation of the previous RED 2.
Well, clearly, I mean, at the end of the day, it's also a matter of good implementation of the measures, and yes, I mean, yeah, probably I omitted a part of of the discussion and of the arguments when I was making my points before. Clearly, financial stability and regulatory stability is important, but it's also important to make everything easy for the consumer, because if permitting procedure for solar panel or for installing, for example, a wall box to charge one's electric car in a house is too cumbersome. Consumers will not go for it because it's not their job. I mean, we all have different jobs, and we are, being a consumer is sort of our side job and our part-time job, and this should not become our full-time job, because otherwise we will not have time for other things.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jaume. I mean, moving now to the next part of our conversation for the 20 minutes left, I really wanted to exchange with you on the hydrogen strategy, which is really the new piece kind of the Fit for 55, a very big part of the review of the RED II. It's a targeted review, as Antonio said, but it's a review which is going to be maybe the biggest part also in the frame of the Renewable Energy Directive. And I'd like to talk a bit about the ambitions that we have and how it complexifies a bit the environment for us. In particular, how can we track now green electrons in a whole system integrated approach, where the questions of additionality and certification are becoming more and more important. So maybe a question quickly to all of you, and if you could, just give a sharp answer on how do you see the competitiveness of renewable in the near future, and what are the best use cases, and in particular how you envisage the place and the role of renewable hydrogen in your respective sectors. Maybe starting with you, Elena, as Iberdrola has started to ramp up its renewable hydrogen activities. Where are we?
Thanks. We see two phases, I mean, two steps. The first one would be the massive electrification, of course, especially for heat and transport. And then the use of renewable hydrogen for hard-to-abate sectors. And in this regard, I would like to highlight the huge uncertainty that we have at the moment. Even for the hard-to-abate sectors, we don't understand the same for that concept. For instance, and I'm talking about Iberdrola and myself, 1 year ago, I thought that the heavy-duty transport was a hard-to-abate sector. And I don't think it anymore, so it's no longer valid. My view at the moment, our view, the industry view, is that it would be electrified in a 90% very much of that. So of course there will be a part of electrofuels or renewable fuels, but it will just be a minor part of the chunk. So we are changing about how much the demand will be of the hydrogen needed, and we are not sure about where it will be needed. So we should be cautious about especially for the deployment of an infrastructure, because we could get into a stranded asset. So I would for sure start with the feedstock of the hydrogen that we are already using. We should be substituting that feedstock in order to improve and to start the market. And very concretely in the part that is not electrifiable. So that would be, for instance, we're talking about the industry, some of the industry with very high temperature, like fertilizers, for instance. We're talking about the aviation or shipping. That's for sure the things that I would say are hard to rate at the moment, but that's it. I wouldn't go any further at this moment. Maybe in some years we'll have a better view of it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Elena. So mostly hard to abate. I mean, good to note indeed, as you said, that the limit of hard to abate sector is also a moving target, and we need to keep that in mind when planning for our sectors. Transport, here, what is the landscape for renewable hydrogen?
Yeah, I think Elena stole my thunder there. So yeah, aviation and shipping is the short answer. So I think, yeah, and going back maybe to the topic of today, the Renewable Energy Directive, what we don't want to see is very high targets for these RFNBOs, renewable fuels of non-biological origin, so all kinds of green hydrogen and e-fuels, where you set very high targets, where in the end you would start driving also, or force fuel suppliers to start supplying liquid e-fuels to combustion engine vehicles. Like that would not be, that's definitely not a hard to abate sector. So in a nutshell, I think we really need a very close coordination between what's going on with DG Move and the aviation and shipping sector, where an e-kerosene sub-target for aviation on aviation fuel suppliers ship owners should also have a carbon intensity reduction requirement, and also drive e-fuels in that sector, in the shipping sector. So because like definitely with an ETS or a carbon price, you will never close the gap between the cost of the green e-fuels and hydrogen and the cost of the fossil fuels. Like the gap is too big, so the red will really need to drive that demand. And I think the red is really a cornerstone, has a key role to play there.
Mm-hmm. I'll give you a new thunder then, Gerd, because I mean, we see also that one of the elements that was or seems to be under scrutiny is potentially targets for renewable hydrogen in various sectors. So you mentioned also the target for RF and bio, and it's all very complex because one electron can only be used once. So do you think that if we put in place specific sectorial targets, then it would make sense to also put in place additionality requirements, or do we need a specific certification system? How do we avoid double counting in this whole discussion?
Yeah, I think the question of additionality is key. So we want to make sure that indeed that the hydrogen producers or e-fuels producers really add to renewables deployment. I think that because of the sectors where it's going to go are really the sectors where there's no other option, no other technical or cost-effective option to decarbonize. So I think that the additionality is key, and to show that, I think, yeah, we need to show both the renewability of the sources, and I think, yeah, the guarantees of origin have a role to play, but then also really to drive the additional deployment, I think the corporate PPAs will have another key role to play, and I think the both need to be connected together to ensure that we get that additionality for the hydrogen sector and the joint broader e-fuel sector.
Andor, you are the ear also of your customers when it comes to their appetite for maybe new contracts. How is the appetite for renewable hydrogen contracts today? Is it happening, or is it just a desirable outcome for your clients? And how do you think we should play with the certification or information tools to ensure consumers can make a good choice when it comes to the origin of what they consume?
There's definitely a lot of interest, but it's also fair to say that not a lot is happening, let's say, in contracting directly for green hydrogen or other types of low carbon renewable gases yet. So many companies, let's say, have been working on greening their electricity supplies. Their scope 2 emissions are now starting to focus on their scope 1 emissions, but there is a cost gap to be bridged. And I think that's really where the governments and the European Commission can play a role to look at that support on the supply side, but also on the demand side. How can we create a demand pool within the market to ensure that you overcome the chicken and egg issue again? From a reporting and public disclosure point of view, I think it's really simple from an end user point of view. They would like to have a simple and effective system as we have on the electricity guarantees of origin. So in that sense, having hydrogen, green hydrogen guarantees of origin as a book and claim system seems to make a lot of sense to us. It's also what the AIB, the Association of Issuing Bodies, is working on to expand the current gas scheme that they already have for renewable gases to incorporate that for hydrogen as well. So from that perspective, that seems to make a lot of sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Andor. I mean, I guess that consumer disclosure can be separated from target accounting to some extent. Are GEOs enough then to account for targets, or what could be the approaches to take to complement this and avoid, in particular, double counting, which would be damageable because it would increase CO2 emissions in the near term by putting additional pressure on the grid and maybe triggering new demand for thermal assets on the electricity side. So how do we address this? Elena, would you like to take this?
Yeah, I can
for
take
sure.
it. Sorry,
you go first, Jaume. You go first, please.
I mean, as Herr said before, additionality is key. I mean, like, guarantees of origin should, I mean, green hydrogen, I mean, everything that is labeled as green should be produced from additional amounts of renewable energy or from otherwise curtailed renewable energy. I mean, this is very important. I mean, the discussion on green hydrogen clearly is less important for consumers because, well, and again, agreeing with what Elena and Hertz said before, we don't think, I mean, clearly residential heating is not one of those sectors that is hard to electrify and hard to abate. So we think that green hydrogen should be targeted to those other sectors which are hard to abate, and they know that it's a bit of a moving target these days. But it's important to figure out which of these targets of these sectors are hard to abate, also because this has impacts on infrastructure. But yet the discussion is important for consumers because we see a lot of greenwashing taking place in gas markets across Europe. Many offers are on the market and are backed by a very low share of guarantees of origin, and there is a risk that this continued greenwashing can undermine consumer trust in engaging with energy markets. So yes, I mean, like, additionality is clearly important also for consumer.
Well, Elena, what is the difference between certification and information disclosure, and what are the tools potentially that we're looking at here?
Yeah, I think that's the key question. There's a lot of confusion about that. Guarantees of origin were thought just for customer disclosure, so information just to know how renewable their energy was. But the book and claim systems and the guarantees of origin, they are not linked to the physical of the electrons. So what happens if I try to, or if I'm producing hydrogen, supposed to be renewable hydrogen, but there's no guarantee that the renewable supply is getting into that hydrogen, is the one that is producing the hydrogen. And that happens when there's no correlation, temporal or geographical. So as you said, we could come up with an increase of emissions, and I will try to explain it very simple. It works for both the time and the location. So if I'm using, I'm trying to produce renewable hydrogen with a PV, and it's not, I don't know, it's cloudy and it's not getting to all the capacity, then the hydrogen produced is not coming from a renewable source. It's coming from the system, and maybe the system will offset that lack of PV energy with CCGTs or with coal. So at the end of the day, if you sum up everything, then you're getting more emissions, and the renewable hydrogen is not renewable. It's coming from another source. So you need a mass balance system. So you link that you and we can use it in. It looks very complicated, but it's not. It's very similar to the things that we have for the biofuel certification, and we can use a simple PPA. So you can know for sure when and where your renewable source has produced, and you know when and where your renewable hydrogen is obtained. So it's not that hard. It could be simple, but we should be using the guarantees of origin just for one purpose, which is the customer information, and then the certification, the mass balance system, for another thing, as to account, one, as you said, one electron renewable is just one, or not two or three.
Mm-hmm. So there could be an approach where, at the end of the day, the big part of the job is done kind of at production level, with the whole certification process that needs to be more exigent when it comes, or demanding when it comes to temporal and geographical correlation. And once we've done that, the geo could be the same, and therefore for the end consumer that would not necessarily change or add complexity.
Yeah, it makes sense that the geo would evolution to get into a mass balance. So I think the geo are simpler, so we need another certification system. So both of them should converge, but into a mass balance system, not a book and claim.
Thank you. Maybe I would like to have one last question to Geert before I hand over to Antonio, because I think a lot of things were said in the whole hydrogen discussion, and I would like to hear your reactions. Yeah, so you also said it's very important to have additionality, and when we look at the transport sector, it's one of the biggest bulk of the demand, and we're looking at quite significant volumes. One thing we hear sometimes is if you're too demanding on additionality, you're going to drive demand in the short term for the most competitive sources, which are blue hydrogen so far, so fossil-based hydrogen. Do you share this assessment or this concern?
Well, the short answer is no. So I can give you a slightly longer answer. I always have to laugh a bit when they mention blue hydrogen. So blue hydrogen is, steam methane reforming of fossil gas and then burying the released CO2 underground by means of carbon capture and storage. So like whenever people mention CCS and rapid deployment in one sentence, it doesn't work together very well. I find there's no evidence to show that CCS is very rapidly deployable. Yes, there are some projects, I think the UK and the Netherlands, that are quite far advanced, but apart from that, I'm not seeing CCS projects popping up all over Europe. I do see a lot of electrolyzer combined with the investments in renewables popping up all over Europe, but I don't see this happening in the same way with blue hydrogen. So secondly, the question is also like, how low carbon is blue hydrogen really? It really, again, takes a full life cycle analysis to establish that. And well, I don't see the point in really weakening the sustainability criteria for renewable hydrogen and e-fuels just to get hydrogen in as many sectors of the economy as possible. Like, the focus should be on reducing fossil fuels, reducing emissions, and there's many ways to do that. Like, hydrogen is one of the ways, but there's energy efficiency. In the shipping sector, you can do slow steaming, so reduce shipping speeds, and you save a lot of energy that way. So this idea that e-fuels are the first go-to option and we should have as much of it as possible, I think is a flawed argument. So I think we should get it right from the start, take the lessons from the biofuel policies of the EU, where we've driven a huge demand of unsustainable biofuels, and really get it right from the start. So no, blue hydrogen is not rapidly deployable, not more rapid than green hydrogen. And a lot of the analysis shows that anyway, by 2030, green hydrogen will be cheaper. So the investment window is really shrinking very rapidly. So I think those would be some of the final comments I would say on that.
Indeed, and thank you for recalling as well that the whole question of additionality is very closely linked with the notion of prioritizing the end users. Because if we look only, let's not remember that hydrogen, despite being a huge and promising option, remains, in the best case scenarios today, 35% less efficient than the direct use of electricity. So if we're going to apply the energy efficiency first, and if there was an eco-design for hydrogen applications, it would not be qualifying in all sectors. And so even though we often hear the right to hydrogen, we don't have the right to use any boiler today. So it should be important also to put the use of hydrogen very much into perspective with energy efficiency and the best use of our resources. Antonio, you will have this very hard task in the next month and weeks. So maybe as a concluding remark from you, it would be great to hear what you plan to do on hydrogen. You cannot tell us so much, I know, but at least on the question of additionality and certification, what do you think will be the best areas to work on?
Well, a lot has been said already on the hydrogen front by many of you, and I can agree with many of the statements. I think our hydrogen strategy is rather clear on a number of things. On the importance of hydrogen in the context of energy system integration, on the lead markets we see for hydrogen to develop, and those have been mentioned. The transport sector, especially aviation and maritime and industry. Refineries, fertilizers, current hydrogen production, future production for the steel sector. So these are clearly part of the thinking and part of the sectors we see hydrogen to be supplied to and to be developed for. The level of ambition of the EU in hydrogen and the ambition to become a global leader in hydrogen technologies is clear. We have a target for 40 gigas of renewable hydrogen electrolyzers for 2030. This is being replicated by national targets, by member states, soon reaching that level of ambition if we adapt the different national commitments. So this is, I think, important. This is clearly linked to the priority we established for renewable hydrogen. I think there is no discussion about that. It's, from our point of view, the most compatible option with climate neutrality, but also in terms of future development and cost competitiveness in terms of prices after 2030. That's probably the clear winner. The role of low carbon hydrogen is, I mean, considered also important, but we see it more as a way to decarbonize primarily existing hydrogen production, where, I mean, if CCS could be deployed relatively quickly to decarbonize existing hydrogen production with steam methane reforming, that could be a clear option. There could be also the option of producing low carbon hydrogen from electricity which is not renewable. So all these might play a role into the final solution, but without deviating ourselves from the final goal, which is renewable hydrogen. I mean, we want to avoid any lock-in to non-renewable technologies in that regard. Now, additionality is absolutely key. I think the concept itself is easy and it's a no-brainer at the end of the day. I mean, if we want renewable hydrogen to make a difference in terms of emissions and in terms of climate neutrality, its deployment will need to go hand in hand with renewable electricity. So this is clear, because otherwise we will be deviating renewable electricity that would be used for direct electrification or for direct use. So this is clear. What we are doing in terms of additionality, I mean, there is a lot of debate out there, but it's not rocket science. I mean, we've got a clear mandate from the co-legislator, from the European Parliament and the Council in RED II, to develop a delegated act on how to define the conditions to account renewable hydrogen produced with electricity, to account hydrogen produced with electricity consumed from the grid as 100% renewable hydrogen. This is part of our implementation work of RED II. I think the conditions are defined in the directive, and we are trying to apply them in a way that we ensure the application of additionality without creating a barrier for the renewable hydrogen market to develop, because of course this is important, and at the end of the day, the idea is that this delegated act doesn't block the emergence of projects, but helps projects to develop in the right direction. So I think that's the thinking behind. This will come in the second part of this year. The deadline is end of the year. Now, I mean, in addition to that, I mean, we are looking at the different actions that are enshrined in the hydrogen strategy and the energy system integration strategy for hydrogen. And there, I mean, I could flag perhaps two. I mean, everything that has to do with certification. I mean, this is being tackled now in the revision of the Renewables Directive, and everything that has to do with possible end-use quotas in the hard to decarbonize sectors. And we are looking at these things. It's again a bit too early to say what's going to be the conclusion of that debate, and we hear the arguments from Gerd and also from others about the key considerations in that regard, and of course we are very much aware of that, and we are trying to strike the right balance.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Antonio. I mean, very good to hear that. The strive for additionality is indeed definitely the goal. I think it's worth taking time to discuss this question also at EU level, because it might require a lot of brain to set it right, but the stakes are here. How do we make sure that we do not increase the use of CO2 emitting sources in the near term? How do we ensure at the same time the rollout of electrolyzers as an industrial flagship? And I'm sure that all the people present here will be very happy to contribute and collaborate with the European Commission in order to make sure we get this framework right. We're 5 minutes overdue, but I think it was worth it to expand a bit on the hydrogen discussion. I would like to thank very much all our panelists for taking the time today, for their very insightful contribution to this debate, and I hope our audience now is very much more acquainted with all the diversity of topics that we have to deal with and the heavy workload that we have ahead of us. So thank you very much to all of you. Maybe just the last to go in the last slides of this webinar, just to tell all our attendees that of course there are a lot of other online visibility opportunities to work together on organizing webinars, podcasts, or interviews, and do not hesitate to reach out to us if you liked this webinar today. And voila, I think I only have now to wish you all a lovely day, and to meet you again on the 24th of June for our next webinar on high power module, looking at system cost, module price, and quality. Thank you so much. Looking forward to work with all of you in the frame of the Fit for 55 package, and I wish you a lovely sunny day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.